Hi, I'm Patrick Manning at Black Desert Resort. We are proud sponsors of Beyond the Game. I recognize that wins aren't always measured by points. Scoreboards don't always define champions, but the story this athlete has to tell, it does. This is why Black Desert Golf Course is proud to sponsor Beyond the Game to share this inspiring story with you. Please enjoy.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong, happy to be back again as always, and we're going to talk a little bit of football about the Utah State game. So let's buckle in and let's have some fun because it was fun, right? I know it didn't feel that way sometimes, but it was mostly fun. So we'll jump into that in just a second. Let me tell you about our partners, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club feel with destination resort golf amid lava fields and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach, home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, so let's talk about this game. So Utah goes up to Logan for the first time since 2012. Obviously, that last game up there didn't go Utah's way. We talked about that. We're not going to get into that. It doesn't matter. But Utah goes up there and gets a win, 38-21. The score looks good considering everything that happened, but the reality is it didn't really start out that well. Utah went down 14-3 outside of a Smith-Snowden remarkable interception in the end zone for the very first drive for Utah State. This could be a very different game. Utah State could have gone up 21-3. There was a lot of momentum on Utah State's side, and Utah had to find a way to fight through that adversity and come out away with the win. So there's a lot of positives here. There's a lot of I wouldn't necessarily call them negatives. We'll say that there's things that you have to be on the lookout for. But there was some good and bad things here, and we'll break it down. So going into that game, talking to the players, I didn't get the sense that they were looking down on Utah State as if this was going to be a walkthrough. They wanted to take this seriously, especially as it being an in-state game. Anytime you can play an in-state opponent, you have to kind of just take it seriously, just simply for the fact that you want to be able to get that win. You don't want anybody in-state holding those bragging rights over you. It doesn't matter if it's Utah State or BYU or any of these FCS schools. That's just, you've got to have those bragging rights for recruiting and everything else that comes with that. This is a team, though, that they really didn't show up to begin the game. They, as Kyle Whittingham called it, he said they sleepwalked through the first quarter and really just kind of just didn't look like themselves, right? This was a team that it took a minute to get going. Offensively, you kind of expected that, or at least I expected that, just simply because it being Isaac Wilson's first start. We didn't know what it was going to look like. You kind of had to play with what Utah State was going to give you. It takes time. But this was a situation where they honestly just didn't look great. And so it took them a minute. Obviously, kind of got the juices flowing a little bit with Utah State jumping out to that big lead. Their defensive line was wreaking havoc. Their offensive line was providing protection. Utah really wasn't able to do much on either side of the ball in terms of kind of what their game strategy was, right? If you remember last week, I said Utah's going to want to put a ton of pressure on that offensive line to try to force Bryson Barnes into bad throws or whatever that may be. Just putting him into pressure in any situation. And it was the opposite in a lot of ways. It was Utah being pressured. It was Utah State coming in there and absolutely just dialing it up, doing whatever they could to be able to make sure that they could put pressure on Isaac Wilson and making it tough on him. Utah handled it well for the most part, but it wasn't a situation that was easy for him. This was a game that, it took some fighting. It took some, moxie to be able to come in there and fight back. But all in all, when you look at this game, if you look at the PFF stats, and we can kind of jump into some of that if we need to. But all in all, this was actually a very positive game for Utah. Looking at their first two games, Southern Utah and Baylor, there were different grades that they didn't grade out very high. Usually, you want to see green in a PFF document. And by all accounts, everything was green and sometimes even higher to the kind of that bluish area. All in all, it was an 83.8 grade for the game. So there may be some pessimism about what you saw, a little bit of frustrations about how Utah State was able to push Utah around a little bit. But this graded out as a very solid game overall. Now, that doesn't mean that things were perfect, right? There's aspects of this game that just didn't go Utah's way, and that happens. That's going to be the case. Each game is a matchup within itself, and you've got different things to fight. But you were also going up against a former quarterback that knew everything about Utah's defense. Utah, yes, they knew everything about Bryson Barnes and tried to scheme towards that. But there's a challenge on both sides of that, right? Utah understands everything about him, but Bryson, probably more than anybody else in the country, understands that defense and what Morgan Scalley is trying to do. Kyle Whittingham said after the game that Morgan Scalley tried to, scheme it up a little bit differently, trying to make sure that he could keep Bryson guessing. Kind of a similar game plan to the USC game in the Pac-12 championship. He said that was kind of the mold and the model that they used, but it honestly just wasn't working. There wasn't enough of what they needed to do. Guys were in bad spots. The coverage just wasn't there, and part of that is the scheme, but part of that is also you have some players that are out. You have a guy like Corene Reed, who I mentioned last week, who is kind of the heartbeat of the defense. He's as vital as the quarterback is on the offensive side of the ball. Corene Reed is kind of that guy on the defense where he's able to orchestrate the schemes, the plays, and everything that goes on, and try to be that communicator for everybody out there. When you lose a guy like that who didn't play, that changes the dynamic of it. You've got other guys that are filling in. You've got Jonathan Hall. You've got Sione Fotu. And Sione Fotu was bringing a ton of pressure early. He was one of the kind of standouts initially that I saw. The problem was sometimes he, over pursued and missed his assignment, and it didn't really help in a lot of respects because of that. But at the end of the day, he was trying to fill a role that he hasn't filled before in terms of being that communicator on the defense. So losing Corene was kind of a big point of that. Outside of that, there was blown coverage in the secondary. You had guys that were getting beat, and Utah State's receivers are dynamic. Jalen Royals is obviously a great talent there, and unfortunately didn't finish the game due to injury. But there was many receivers there that were able to make some space or get some space and kind of give Bryson Barnes some times to throw. So some things to clean up there. But all in all, this was, we're looking at this. Let's look at this from the Isaac Wilson perspective. So he comes in here. This is his very first start. He is not the youngest freshman to ever start for Utah. I kind of assumed he would be with how young he is, but he's actually the third youngest. So still remarkable. You get the whole week's prep, that 80% that Kyle Whittingham had talked about. Cam Rising was dressed. He did have a bandage on his ring finger. Doesn't appear to be serious in person, but we'll see how things go. But this was a situation where Isaac was going to get the full first team reps. He was going to come into the week knowing that he was the guy. He was going to scheme towards the Utah State game, and it paid dividends. This is a guy that has only seen two halves of football after coming in for Cam Rising, and so it changes the dynamic of how a player plays when they know that they're the guy, right? And he obviously understood that and got things going. Now, early on, this, it wasn't pretty for Isaac. It's not that he was terrible, but it wasn't anything great, right? He wasn't able to move the offense as well. There didn't seem to be a lot of touch on his passes. He was either zipping them too hard, so guys couldn't catch them. Some of them, a Dijon Stanley, for example, not to just throw him under the bus, but he did drop a pass. One of them was a little too high, so we won't put that on him. But there was other times where Isaac, as he had the ball that was too high, he was lofting it sometimes too much, where the Utah State defender could have ample time to be able to get there, make a play on the ball, and it just was there. The connection wasn't there yet. That's going to come, right? Like, Isaac is going to be much better for this game because it takes time to kind of learn that, right? He's got to get into that rhythm, got to get into what it is, and so. Early on, Utah faces that deficit, and Isaac hasn't done a great job of moving the ball, but then everything clicked. There seemed to be a point, and I think it was late in the second quarter, if I'm not mistaken, where you could just kind of see him settling in. And this wasn't quite as jarring as the third quarter, where the third quarter he came out as a different quarterback. But in the second quarter, things started to click a little bit. Utah's defense changed up a little bit, and they were able to limit what Utah State was able to do. They get those 2 first touchdowns, and then after that, it was a while until they were able to score again. And so Utah was able to kind of do what they needed to do. But once Isaac started to get that confidence, you could kind of see his ball change, right? You were seeing him get it a little bit better to his receivers and do different things there. He got a pass, a high point ball to Caleb Lohner in the end zone where nobody else can get it but him. I mean, the pictures of that is pretty, jarring in the sense of how tall Lohner is compared to those DBs that are going to go up against him. He becomes a valuable asset, not just there, but also in the kicking game where he can, disrupt the play, potentially block a kick, those types of things. But this was a situation where Isaac was starting to feel more comfortable. You were starting to get that Utah scores and takes the lead before halftime. Everything kind of seems better. I think had Utah gone into halftime breakdown, I still think they would have been okay and they could have remained composed and done it. But I think having that lead going into halftime completely changed the game for Utah. They went in there with a little bit more relaxation without feeling like you have to stress, knowing that there's a million things that they had to clean up. But you go into that locker room knowing that things can get better and you can continue to now do more and kind of put your stamp on this game. Isaac comes out that second half, and he completes 7 straight completions starting in the third quarter. He had a 33-yard pass, 12-yard, 13-yard pass. Those were all in consecutive order. And then there was some other plays in between all this, but he has 7 consecutive completions, and you could start to see it flowing, right? Things weren't always perfect still. There's still things. There's a Carson Ryan touchdown. I'm sure you've seen the picture. I tweeted it, where it was a 4th down. They make the play. He gets the touchdown, but Carson had to make a phenomenal play to be able to get a one-handed grab to bring it in for a touchdown. Or was that the 2-point? No, it was the touchdown. But it changed kind of the dynamic because it allowed Isaac to play within himself more. He didn't have to think too much about it. He could go in there and revert back in some respects to how he played in high school, where he just knew that he was one of the best players on the field. He'd come out there, play with some confidence. Part of that is the guys playing around him, right? If they believe in him, they're going to play harder for him. You're going to get that effort from a Carson Ryan. You're going to get that effort from, I think it was Money Parks or somebody else that had to jump up pretty high to get one of his passes. But this is a thing where when they're all kind of gelling together, it becomes much easier. And you saw that. You saw these phenomenal plays that they were able to make, and you saw a quarterback starting to kind of develop. I wrote a story today on this, and I kind of showed a play that really changed my tune. Not that I had this crazy tune about Isaac Wilson, but I think showcased in a game setting who he can be. I'd seen him do these types of things in high school. Watching him play in high school was, dynamic. It was like watching Britton Covey as a quarterback in high school. There was just no stopping him, whether it be through the run or through the air. This is what it was like for Isaac Wilson. He gets in here, and there's the play, and they needed 2 yards. And Brant Keithy, rolls out for the easy 2 yard, behind the line of scrimmage pass that he could have had, 10, 15 yards on because of how much space was given. Isaac, steps back into that pocket. He's all settled. He looks over at him to kind of make sure that everybody knows that he's keeping an eye on Keithy, does a little pump fake, and then immediately looks his eyes as he zips the pass upfield to Money Parks, who's on the sideline in double, almost triple coverage. The triple coverage guy sank down just a little bit because they were trying to respect Brant Keithy. But this is the play where it showed why Isaac is the guy, right? Last year, you may remember, where the frustrations with Utah's quarterbacks, among other things, were that they weren't making those progressions, right? They were seeing their first read. They were seeing the Brant Keithy, right, an open play, and that type of play wasn't open because they knew that was going to be the case. And so they weren't able to go through their progressions and being able to see where open receivers are and seeing where there was space and different areas where you can create more chunk plays, bigger yards. And this is a veteran move from a quarterback. Now, is Isaac to that level yet? No. But this is a guy that isn't going to be afraid of the moments. He's not afraid of being able to take his shots. And sometimes that's going to burn him, right? He's going to throw those picks, and it's going to be frustrating. And, those are the things that Kyle's going to hamper down and try to get corrected. But for the most part, he's doing his part to be able to do what it needs to be as a starting quarterback at a Power 4 level, right? He's looking at his easy play, the check down play. He can come in there and he can look through his progressions and be able to get to where he needs to and then make the play where it needs to be. And that was a phenomenal play. I've watched it a million times. Like I said on my tweet, it looks simple, but it's one of the hardest throws, especially at the college level, for a quarterback to do. Money Parks is essentially covered. We see it from the sky view, essentially the bird's eye view. This is a tough throw because you're throwing into a tight window, putting enough loft and touch on it that allows it to get past that first defender into the arms of Money Parks, who is coming off to the sideline and then hoping to not get, broken up by the other DB. Everything worked perfectly. Money had no problems collecting this. This wasn't a one that he had to high point it. It was right into his arms. It was the perfect throw. I don't want to over-exaggerate one throw, but I think you're seeing that progression from Isaac, right? There's going to be some lumps taken along the way depending on how much time he plays. But this is something that you have to look for in a freshman quarterback. He's doing well. He's making the right progressions. There's going to come some time where he gets that touch, right? He's going to get that consistency and that camaraderie with these receivers. Yes, he works out with them. And yes, he had fall camp and summer and different things there. But the reality is everything was going towards Cam Rising, right? You want Cam to feel comfortable. You want Cam to be able to have all those things. And so Isaac is just trying to do this with limited reps. And so the more he gets this, the better it's going to be. So a lot of progress being seen there. He understands his situation. He understands that there's still definitely more that he has to do. He understands that it's not where he wants to be. And I don't think there's any complacency there from Utah's coaching staff or from Isaac in the sense that they feel like he's arrived now, right? You'd be crazy to think that, but you wouldn't be crazy to think that you can see some potential there, right? Assuming that Cam Rising stays healthy this year and everything goes well and that he plays this week on Saturday, which is trending towards that, and I think all signs point to that, barring something else. This is an opportunity for him to continue to develop in that system, to see how Cam does it, to see how the collegiate level breaks down, and then hopefully for his sake that you get Utah, where they're able to be up by a few touchdowns where they feel comfortable where they could put Isaac in. I don't know that that's what you're gaming for. I mean, obviously you want to get there, but if they can get more of those situations where Isaac can get into the game, all the more better when Cam graduates from the university this year and seemingly they're going to go transition to Isaac Wilson. Sure, there might be a quarterback battle with Sam Heward or some other quarterbacks that are going to be in that roster, but this is shaping up to be kind of the future of Utah football. If they can continue to make those strides and do whatever they need to do, this becomes a great thing, and I think you're seeing some great progress. So just a couple more things about Isaac. He finished the day throwing for 239 yards and 3 touchdowns on 20 of 33 passing. That's 61%. He becomes the first true freshman to throw 3 touchdowns in his very first start at Utah. So he already made history there. It's a great honor for him to have, and once again just shows kind of the situation that he's in. If you compare that to Cam Rising, Cam he didn't have that great of numbers. I don't have them in front of me right here for his very first start against Washington State. But there's a lot of intangibles that are different than just the individual stats, right? Anybody that witnessed Cam Rising play when he got inserted into that San Diego State game understands that the whole game plan shifted around Cam. There's a difference about him and kind of how he was able to do it, so that when he did start the next week against Washington State, yes, the numbers may not have been as good as Isaac's in his first start, but there's a lot of intangibles that go into that showcase why Cam was such the dynamic quarterback that Utah needed, right? And, this is a situation where Utah's trying more and more to be able to be not necessarily a pass-heavy team. They want to emphasize the pass more, but they want it more equal, right? You want it more equal in the sense that you've got the run game and the passing game that kind of mirror each other in a lot of ways. Kyle Whittingham has always said if you can kind of have both of those where they're pretty similar, that shows that you were able to kind of put your footprint on the game, right? In this case, Utah had 239 passing yards and 221 rushing yards. That's as even as you can probably get it. That's a great opportunity for Utah to be able to showcase what they can be. If you can do that with your backup quarterback, that's a great thing for Utah. And obviously we've seen what Cam can do, and you have to assume that things can go up from there. But until Cam can get back on the field, it's going to be a wait and see process. As a starter, he's only played 3 quarters this whole season. So we'll see what happens. There's no worry about who he is as a quarterback. Obviously, this isn't like Isaac is suddenly going to be the guy and there's going to be this quarterback battle. But at least you have a competent backup that is going to be able to keep you in games, right? Does that mean he can win at the highest level? And can he win in the Power 4 level in terms of a conference game? We don't know yet, right? Beating Utah State, although they showed out really well, isn't the same as trying to go up against an Oklahoma State or a Kansas State or a UCF or any of these other teams, or even a rivalry game against BYU. I mean, those games are going to be much more different, and the defenses are going to be much more complex. You're going to get a lot of different things that are going to change. So still a lot to go through with him, but obviously a sign of progress and some good things to come. So that's it for Isaac. We'll end it there with him. As far as moving forward, you've got a run game that is starting to develop. And, early on in the season, there was a lot of talk about, is Mekhi Bernard the guy to be an RB1, right? For some reason, there's this weird notion that he doesn't have the same intangibles or abilities that, a Zach Moss or a Jaquindon Jackson, Tavion Thomas, or any of these guys before him have that allow him to be the starting running back. And to some extent, they're true, right? Kyle Whittingham has even said he's not a guy that is expected to get 20 touches a game. However, I've heard Kyle say that in years past about guys like a Zach Moss. Granted, it wasn't him, but there's other guys that have been these starting caliber running backs that he says that they're probably more of a 15 to 20 type carries. They're not a 30, to down back. And then they turn out and they get more out of that. And I don't know if that's Kyle kind of putting it out there so that his players do more. I don't know. I don't really care. But I think you're seeing some progress from Mekhi. And I don't think that he has to be the prototypical RB1, right? He did get 123 yards and a rushing touchdown on 17 carries. That comes out to 7.2 yards per carry, which is a phenomenal number to be able to have. Obviously, anytime you can get over 5 yards is great. If you're averaging 7.2, you're going to do some good things. And so this is a case where Mekhi is able to do some good things. And granted, yes, I have to take the caveat there. One of those was a massive run that he had where he went down the sidelines. And, that changed a lot of that. And so some of these numbers aren't fully equal to what you would consider the every down situation. But it showcases who he can be as well. It shows that he's got the vision that if it breaks free, he's going to present it. It's going to present itself, and then he's going to be able to take advantage of it. And that's what you want. We're not going to nitpick and say, well, we want to see more 7-yard runs instead of the 86-yard runs. No, nobody's going to want that. You want those large runs. You want to be able to see that happen. So Is Mekhi Bernard quite the back that like a Zach Moss or a Jaquindon Jackson is? No. But at the same time, I don't think that you need that with what they have. They want Mike Mitchell to kind of be in there and get into the mixes in there as well. He averaged 5.4 yards on 14 carries for 75 yards, and he's doing that with a hurt ankle. It's an ankle that continues to bother him. It's kind of like Jaquindon last year. For some reason, Utah and their running backs, they have one guy that has to always be hampered by that. But Mike is making progress, right? He's not going to throw in the towel. He's kind of cut from the same cloth that Jaquindon was last year, where it's going to hurt, and he's going to have those moments where he's on the field and the training staff comes out and you're thinking that it's a season-ending injury, those types of things. But he gets taped up, he gets checked out, and he's out there to get ready to go again and does his job. But you've got that, mix in Dijon Stanley, and Utah feels comfortable with where they're at. Now, a side note here, there's been a lot of talk about where is Jalen Glover. And I don't know the full extent of that or anything to the extent that to make it public. But at the same time, Kyle has been very clear that he has to be the same running back Monday through Friday, right? Everything has to work the same. That this is Kyle trying to light a fire under him a little bit, try to get him to where he needs to be. Right now, it just doesn't appear that Jalen Glover is in the mix. I don't know if that's going to change. I don't know if this is an attitude thing or difference there, but you've got to see consistency, right? We saw him making strides last year, but there wasn't those same strides in terms of where he needed to be. He lost weight. He was feeling better. They had a lot of optimism about him, but he still hasn't been able to take it where it needs to go. That's not to say that Jalen can't be that guy, but at the same time, he's got to kind of buy in. This is becoming a tougher situation, though. If you're not getting any touches in the last two games, it becomes a challenge to project where this goes. And if there's anything that you have to know is Quinton Ganther's not going to put up with anything, especially if you're not giving your all. And so if you're checking yourself out of the games, and I'm not saying this is Jalen, so don't put this in there. But if he's checking himself out and he's not putting himself in a position to succeed, Quinton's not going to play him. And unless you're a guy that is like absolutely electric and showcasing why you need to be out on the field and do these things, they're not going to let that slide. And even then, Quinton doesn't let that slide, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why Tavion Thomas did not get playing time, even though Utah players and fans knew that he could be in there and get in that mix. This is a situation where Utah always talks about you have to become one of us, not we become you, right? This is a situation where you have to be able to do all the right things Monday through Friday so that when Saturday comes, you're good. Once again, I don't know all the nuances of this Jalen Glover thing, but at the same time, if Kyle is publicly saying that, it's sending a message that, something needs to change for him to be able to see the field. And until that happens, it's not gonna be the case. So for this foreseeable future, you've got Mekhi, you've got Mike Mitchell, and you've got Dijon Stanley. And, Dijon Stanley, I know some people are going to look at his game against Utah State and kind of say, okay, what happened? Once again, this is another freshman that's trying to get into the mix, right? You've got a veteran in Mekhi, but you have a freshman who redshirted last year so he could see it, but this is his first opportunity to get those touches and get the opportunities to do what he needs to do. And yes, we've seen two phenomenal wheel routes in that SUU game where he can be a great pass catcher. And then once he catches, he can, go the distance. Yes, he had some problems on Saturday. And outside of one, which was more of a high pass on Isaac, the other one, it happens, right? Receivers drop balls. It's not going to be perfect every time. This isn't an indication that Dijon shouldn't see the field. This is just a situation where it wasn't his best week and, you're going to move on. All in all, though, you have to be a little bit pleased with where Utah's run game is. This is the first time this season they finished the game at 5.4 yards per rush. Once again, Mekhi's long run is going to be factored into that. But all in all, you're seeing a little bit of progress. It's not quite there where you have to say, okay, Utah's run game is dynamic and everything's going to be great. But it's to a point where you can feel a little bit more comfortable with that. However, going up against different defenses is what that's going to look like, right? If they're not able to make these next steps, then you do have to question it. And if you can't get a strong run game, it makes it much harder for that passing game to work because it all just complements each other, and it needs to work out in the right way. So still something to watch. Curious to see how that develops, but I think so far so good for that running back room, excuse me. But we'll see what happens and see if Utah can do a little bit more against Oklahoma State this week. Outside of that, another impact player is Caleb Lohner. And as I mentioned, he got that high point touchdown. He had a full foot and a half above the DB where that ball could go. And he becomes just such a massive weapon for this Utah team. As he's come into the offense, he's learning it, right? He's still trying to figure out the whole football thing after playing forever in basketball, but he's making the necessary moves to be able to get there. Kyle Whittingham today said at his press conference that this is a guy that is going to factor much more into the offense. He's come in there and he's doing all the right things. He becomes an asset where you can't teach height, right? And so if you've got a guy that can catch the passes, a guy that can run the routes and do all the necessary things it takes to be a tight end, then it becomes so much more impressive because he's able to do exactly what they need to. And even if he's just a red zone guy where it's a comfort for those quarterbacks to just throw up a pass where nobody else can get it, that's a great situation to be in, right? It allows Utah to have a dynamic tight end that is different than a Brant Keithy. Brant's never going to be that guy, right? He doesn't have that size. He can't go win those jump ball passes and do what he needs to. Now, Brant can do it in his own right, but it's going to be different. And so you've got another tight end that's coming in here and doing that. Now, with that said, I'm incredibly impressed because coming into this, when it was announced that Caleb Lohner was coming to Utah to commit for football, it was the wildest thing because it just didn't make sense, right? I've said this, it didn't make sense, but they obviously saw something. And I know it was something where you can kind of take him on as a project, and if it works, so be it. If not, we gave it a shot. Hope you had fun. We paid for your school type thing. But this is a guy that's come in there and he's worked tremendously hard to be able to get to where he needs to be, and he's showcasing it on the field. He's becoming one of your starting tight ends where you can get him out there and make plays. And then to put it on a different side, you put him in that field goal unit, and he's able to disrupt kicks, right? We've already seen him disrupt at least 2 kicks. One, Van Fillinger got his hand on it, but he was right there next to it, and he's already blocked another kick. Beyond that, you have a guy where, as a kicker, if you've got such, that wingspan where you can just jump incredibly high and then get those hands up, that changes maybe sometimes the trajectory of how you're going to kick that ball. You know that you can't just get that ball down low. You've got to be able to find something to it. And so I don't know how much that has gone into, missed kicks against Utah this year, but I have to imagine that there's a significant amount of that because of a guy like Caleb Lohner, he's just a big guy, right? If he can get that vertical and do what he needs to. I mean, there's a picture that I saw on social media this week that showcased it. I mean, he's almost a good 5-6 feet above everybody else just with his width, or not his width, his length of just being able to get that vertical and kind of outstretch those arms, that it becomes a massive game changer and showcases what he can be. But Kyle is incredibly excited about his potential. He's excited to see what it could be for the foreseeable future, but he expects him to be a big part of the game plan. They expect him to get more calls. They want him to be in there. So we're seeing some of these players that are coming in and starting to make some impact, and we're not hearing from some other names, and that's not to say that they can't be good for Utah. But this is the time of the year where, you kind of have to demand those reps. You have to demand the opportunities and demand the ball, and we're getting there, right? You're seeing a Dorian Singer starting to get some passes, and he was instrumental in Utah being able to move the ball. But we're still not to that level where I think fans were expecting. The run game, I think everybody's okay with for the most part. But beyond that, you still want to see more in that passing game. And some of that is because Cam hasn't played a ton. But I'm curious to see how it develops. What does this tight end room look like? Brant Keithy's going to get his yards, but who is it beyond him? Is it Caleb Lohner? Is it a Carson Ryan, who obviously made some great plays and has been able to do well? Is it a Landon King? Is it a Miki Sukarataga, Dallin Bentley? I mean, there's just so many assets there in that room, and then you're not even factoring in a Dorian Singer or a Money Parks. We still really haven't seen many other wide receivers. Micah Pittman got his first catch of the year last week, but it's still a work in progress, and so I think Utah's still not fully where they want to be. But there's been some factors there, obviously, with Isaac having to play and kind of learning. But this could be a team that we still don't know a ton about. This is, week 3, week 4 is usually where Kyle says that we find out who a team is. But I still think we're learning with this Utah team. There hasn't been a lot of perfect play. There's been some great aspects of it, and as I mentioned in those PFF grades, the game graded out as probably the best of the season, but by and large, this hasn't been perfect. So on the defensive side, I'm not going to overlook them because this was a big problem. They were getting a ton of pressure, but at the same time, they were falling for a lot of the fake handoffs that Bryson Barnes was utilizing. Rasul Faison, phenomenal running back for Utah State, and he absolutely gashed Utah at times. There were moments where they couldn't contain him, and he would break free for some big yards, which absolutely set up what Utah State wanted to do, because they wanted to utilize a fast tempo and go do what they needed to. So he'd run for a bunch of yards, they'd line up real quick, do it again, then they'd fake the handoff to him, and either Bryson would run or he'd go for a pass for 35 yards, and suddenly Utah State was in the red zone. It was a situation where Utah's defense just didn't they weren't ready for it, right? Some of that is trying to stay up tempo. Utah tends to be a little longer in how they get or relay the signals from the sidelines, and so there has to be a little bit more to speed that process up. Yeah, you have the helmet communication for one of the players on the defensive side, but it's not always the easiest, especially in a fast tempo offense, to be able to have that, because those signals, everybody has to look, everybody has to know, and so there's some things that I think Utah's going to have to go back to the drawing board and look at to be able to make sure that they can clean up. The run blocking, or the run defense, I should say, just wasn't there. They've got to clean that up, especially if you're going up against Ollie Gordon, who he hasn't had the best year. He had a much better year last year, and so I'm curious to see how that goes. But Ollie's a type of player that's absolutely going to make you lose contain if you can't do your job in that run defense, and so we'll see how that goes and see what Utah's able to do. But things are going to get cleaned up. I have a tendency to believe that the way Utah has played this season is a benefit, and I say that in the sense that I think that because it hasn't been this glowing, you're dominating your first 3 opponents by 40 points, which it looked that way in some cases, especially before Cam Rising went out. This gives Utah kind of that edge to say, look, we've got to be better. We've got to do this. And if, we don't, look, we can be beat. This is a much easier thing for coaches to teach going into a game like Oklahoma State. Not that you need any extra motivation. This becomes a massive game, and we'll talk about this week as we preview it, but this becomes a massive game for Utah to kind of establish itself in the Big 12, not just for it being a conference game, but just because Oklahoma State is, nipping on your heels in the rankings, is expected to be in the title game, just like you are next to either Kansas State or now it's UCF or some other of these teams. This becomes a challenge. And so you've now got a ton of tape that you can use to work on for these players, keep them motivated, keep them hungry. And I think it benefits Utah. So if they can make the strides that they need to, those progressions over the next week, and some of that maybe they were overlooking Utah State, some of it maybe that Bryson Barnes knew the defense and knew how to beat it. There's a lot of different things there, but I think this is more encouraging for Utah in what they could become, right? It's discouraging in the sense that you thought this defense was going to be better in these areas, but it's encouraging in the sense that this gives them something to work on and be better in as they progress throughout the season. So that's the nature of these games, though. Early on in the season, defenses generally look a little slower Not always, but they look a little slower. You've got guys in different positions that you've never had them, or that they're new to the position. And so it's going to take some time. But Morgan Scalley has proven that he's been able to get his guys in a way that is effective at the end of the season. You just have to have that on point essentially this week, and then be able to move on. So curious to see how this goes, but I think that's kind of some fun with it, and that's what makes each week kind of the fun matchups and gives us an opportunity to talk more about these things. So, but with that, we're going to wrap up today. That's kind of the recap. There's a lot of things that we could go into this game, but all in all, I think you have to leave it with a positive note. You have to look at this and say that this is a team that is still got a lot to prove, but they've got enough talent to be able to do what they need to. It's just a matter of putting it all together and not, coming out there slow and letting the other team dictate the terms. So we'll come back to you later this week, hoping to have a special guest to be able to talk about Oklahoma State, and we'll preview that game and get ready for conference season. But with that, we'll say goodbye, and we'll talk to you later.